Anyway, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm going to take, 30 minutes or so to lay out constituent voice methodology as we use it to try to understand performance for social value creation, and describe a little bit how we work with organizations in doing that. I work with an organization called Keystone, which is a British, South African, and American nonprofit that is innovating systems to improve the way we measure and communicate the change we try to make in the world. And we do it in a particular way. We do it by focusing on getting better feedback from the people that we mean to help, and to create, get that feedback in ways that can allow organizations to use it to improve and to communicate their work to the outside world more vividly. We've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years, and along the way we've spent a lot of time looking at conventional evaluation methodology and other interesting more contemporary approaches toward measurement, like social return on investment, most significant change, and outcome mapping, and methodologies like that, all of which I'm pretty familiar with. And all have their strengths and weaknesses, as does constituent voice. So I think if you guys can see my screen, I'm going to go to my deck now, and basically what we'll cover in this talk is a little introduction on constituent voice, describe how you can get it, and what it's useful for, and how it can actually change the way your organization works. The way I like to think about information that we use to manage and improve our work, I think about that kind of information in 3 different headings. One heading is around our performance, execution on activities, levels of input, whether it's money or staff or other kinds of inputs, and tracking that. It's usually managed and tracked through project monitoring systems. And you're looking at trying to get some sense of how your inputs and the activities that you undertake relate to the outputs, to the immediate things that happen. So you would, out of your performance measurement activities, you would get things like what it costs to deliver a unit of training or sell a particular product. The other area the other bucket at the top there on this graph points to results. And this is where you want to know not just your outputs, what happened, but what actually changed, what's different. And there's been a lot of focus on this over the last decade, and people talk, it's all about what the word impact is about, is a kind of a result. And there's lots of methodologies to try to get at this bucket. And in a way, a lot of this conversation is about that. But constituent voice as a methodology is really located in this 3rd category of information, which is the most neglected category. It's the one that people put the least formal investment into, in my experience. And that is your relationships. And what's interesting about relationships is that they actually drive outcomes. They drive results. And so if you have bad relationships, you don't have the kinds of results you could get if you had better relationships. And by focusing your measurement activities a little bit on your relationships, you can actually strengthen those relationships and therefore improve your results. But something else interesting happens when you focus on relationship measures, and that's what the arrows on this graphic are meant to represent. Because when you take evidence of your performance or evidence of your results, however you have tracked that evidence, whatever methodologies you're using, say an independent impact evaluation, and you take that information and you share it with the people that you are working with, that you're trying to create social value for and with, that then allows them to have a deeper understanding of of what you're trying to do, and they can indeed validate or challenge the story that you're telling or the measures that you're sharing. So it's a form of validation of your results to actually share those results with people. And so it's kind of a secondary element to relationship measures as a general thing. So this graph basically suggests the kind of trajectory of relationship measures and how they work. You begin by measuring the quality of relationships, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. You then review and analyze what you're learning through that. You share what you're learning back with the people who've provided you with the feedback, and thereby engendering a more authentic conversation with people. And then you improve and you do the cycle again and again and again. To shift now to the specifics of our methodology, we can actually boil it down to 5 elements. The first element is to ask a very small number of questions continuously across your entire population, the people that you're trying to serve. And if it's a big organization with a large constituent group, you'll be looking across representative samples. And you don't want to be surveying people constantly. So you break it down into small samples, and you eventually, so if you were surveying once a week, someone you were actually working with might get one survey every 8 weeks or something. But you're only asking 2 to 5 questions. It takes less than a minute to respond, so it's not a burden for people to respond. Then once you have your responses, you cluster, you analyze the responses into 3 categories. The people who are very happy with you and are really engaged, your promoters. The people who are on the fence. They're not sure, they're not too negative, they're not too positive, they're kind of neutral. We call those the passives. And then the people that are not happy, that are there basically despite you. And we call them your detractors. And this is a very powerful form of analysis because it allows you to develop strategies to work with each of the categories. The next bullet is that as you analyze your findings, you compare it with similar organizations. Benchmarking is very powerful because when you're getting feedback from people using closed-end questions, which is what we do, asking people to give you responses on a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 7, whatever the scale is you're using, those numerical responses, you don't quite know what they mean. You know, a 5 might seem pretty good, but then on say a 7-point scale. But then you see when you compare it to other organizations that a 5 on a 7-point scale turns out to be quite low, and that puts you at the bottom of the class. So it's very important whenever possible to organization really understand what that means. The 4th step is to use the data, to manage it, to go back to the people and tell them what you understood from them and how to interpret it and what you propose to do, to work with your staff so that they see how they can do things that will improve the scores that you're getting. And that brings me to the last point, which is empower the frontline staff to really improve their scores and reward people who do improve their scores, and train the people or move them out if they can't. So that's the essence of the methodology. Now, this is focusing in on the continuous asking of very, very short surveys. There's another piece to this, which makes up the overall constituent voice picture. So, if you will, in this slide, the relationship quality is the piece that I've just talked about. But there are 2 other components to your overall constituent voice scorecard as we've developed it. And these are the kind of needs analysis. Is what you're offering relevant to people? How important is it to people? And then your service quality, the actual how people are experiencing a particular incident. If the relationship questions look at the overall relationship, the service quality surveys look at how they experienced a particular moment, a particular touch point, as they call it in the customer satisfaction industry. And it's the three together that make up your overall constituent voice scorecard. Now, with respect to relevance analysis and service quality, these tend to require longer questionnaires. So they're done less frequently, maybe once a year or once every 18 months, and they go into in greater detail about the nature of the services that you have, or the kind of program or relationship that you have with people. It kind of breaks it down. So you might have 20, 30, even 40 questions in a survey like that. Okay, going back to relationship quality, we've focused in on 5 elements that we think are at the heart of every developmental relationship: trust, voice, empowerment, credibility, and readiness. And I'll say a bit more about these in some of the examples that I'm going to give. But the point I want to make here is that 4 of these questions or themes relate to how people experience you, how they feel about you, how they feel about your organization. The 5th one, readiness, switches the arrow and points it back at the respondent and asks them to rate themselves about how able, ready, and willing they are to engage with you. And this turns out to be really important as you move from collecting feedback from people to having a dialogue with people. And it changes the way they respond to the questionnaires when they start to see it as a two-way process. One of the things we find consistently in the surveys is that people rate their own readiness higher than they rate the organization's readiness, if you will. And that's a great thing to put on the table in feedback, report back sessions where you discuss the findings, and people, it kind of helps advance the relationship. The other interesting thing about, the other interesting question I want to call out here is the credibility question. The credibility question turns out to, the credibility question basically is I usually ask something like, how likely is it that you think this organization is going to use your feedback well and improve? And what we have found, and what this slide partially demonstrates, there's some missing data that I'll explain, is that your credibility scores can go up. In this case, this is an actual slide from an organization's report where they had taken our survey twice, once in 2010, and that's the purple marker at -20, and once again this year, and that's the blue marker at about 28. And what happened between 2010 and 2012 is their credibility score jumped by 46 points. What was interesting was that even though people rated them as being far more credible in terms of their ability to act on the feedback, their other scores on some of the other areas actually went down. They rated them worse on certain kinds of service quality questions. And we've done some post-survey interviews and things, and we've discovered that what this is happening here is that people are taking the feedback more seriously, and they are, and so they're kind of becoming tougher graders because they see that it actually makes sense to take it seriously and not just to provide a polite answer. And so the really important insight here is that the quality of your surveys, the quality of your feedback will go up as people see that the process is valuable and it yields changes. And so it really vindicates the idea that by taking this seriously and closing the loop with people and feeding back to them, you can improve your scores. Okay, this slide I'm going to speed up because I want you guys to have a lot of chance to ask questions. This slide is an example of benchmarking from our 2010-11 social investor survey. And I think Tanya Beha's on the call, and if she is there, Igneo was one of the organizations that took this survey, so maybe she can ask a question or make a comment about this. But what this shows is this benchmarking piece where we ask the same questions. We provide this to the same survey to the, in this case it was investees of 7 different social investment funds. I think something like 350 investees from these 7 funds responded to the survey. And we grouped the answers into 6 indexes: an efficiency index, a learning index, a net value added index, a transparency index, a credibility index, and a satisfaction index. And just so you can understand what these kind of graphs look like, there's a lot of data packed into here. But what you have here is the gray slice shows you the range of answers to the indexes, from one end to the other, the worst to the best. The dotted line tells you what the mean score was, and the dial tells you what that individual social investor score was, which in this case has been anonymized. But when you get your report, it actually tells you, you know who you are. It's your scores. Everybody else is anonymized. And so just to give you an example of how, for example, in this case, this organization got a value add score of 6, but it was actually the lowest score of the entire cohort. And they might have thought, geez, 6 out of 10, that's not so bad, but in fact, it was the worst. Okay. The second tool focuses on the kind of larger survey that we do, which combines often in tools 2 and 3, looks at need and the kind of a relationship between what you're offering and what it is that people actually receive. And this graph shows quite dramatically from a survey that we did with smallholder coffee farmers in Central America on behalf of a fair trade coffee buyer. And it shows the gap between the service received and how people value that service. And so the pink line tells you how they valued it, and the bars tell you whether they got it or not. So in one case, the 2 cases, there was a slightly greater supply of the service than people valued it. But in all the other cases, there was a gap, and some of the big gaps were obvious opportunities for the company to, provide more of that service. The service quality Tool 3 really focuses in on specific instances and says, okay, at this moment, in this interaction, how did you experience it? And this slide shows you a net promoter analysis from a survey that we did with 14 transnational social change networks. And it shows the net promoter analysis of a particular organization, Network X, on their service quality versus the averages for all of them. As you can see in this case, Network X was pretty close to the averages. But what I like about this graph and why I put it here was that you can clearly see the value of a net promoter analysis, because it shows you, gosh, I have about 1/3 of my members are really excited, about 1/3 are on the fence, and about 1/3 are not happy. And so you can start to hone in and develop strategies for each. Okay, in our surveys, we always disaggregate. We always have questions that are looking for characteristics that will allow you to have a good analysis, a more discrete analysis. So whatever the population characteristics are that are relevant to you, but some of the things that we've looked at are age, gender, location, length of relationship, income level, types of services offered or received, other behavioral profiles that would depend on the circumstance. But so you can always go back and you can recut your analysis for any one of the categories that you have in your demographics. Okay. This is my favorite slide in the presentation, and it's from a survey that we did for a hardwood plantation in Tanzania. And I actually didn't create this slide. The client created the slide. And what I did was we did a survey of the villages around this plantation. And there were H villages. I think it was 7, whatever A to H is. And maybe it's 8. And what we found from these from the surveys in the villages was the scores that you see across the horizontal index, and so they range from a positive 12 in village E and positive 11 in village D to a negative 58 in village A. And so village A was quite hostile to the company. Villages, you know, kind of D and E were pretty positive, and you can see the range. It kind of goes across. I sent this data to the CEO because he was asking for it for a presentation that he wanted to make before our report was finished. And about an hour later, he sent me back a graph that looked more or less like this. And what he did, he took the data and he plotted it against incidents of arson that had happened around each of those villages. And so what you see here is what you kind of would expect, which is that arson is higher where the village is angry. But what this did for the CEO, what he wrote in his email when he wrote it back was, "Now I get it." And what he gets is that we were getting the truth from the villages about how they felt about the company, and now he has a tool that will allow him to take the pulse of the company on an ongoing basis by running these micro surveys on a continuous basis, so that when he makes changes, he can see if he's getting improvement before they show up in fires in the forest. Okay, every time we do a survey like this with these closed-end questions, we always include an open question where we're essentially asking people to expand on their answer or give examples or whatever it is appropriate way to phrase that question. And then our reports are peppered with selections from the answers, and we always give back the entire set of answers. It's always anonymized. We're maintaining confidentiality for the respondents in these surveys. That's why you use a third party, and you don't collect the data yourself. You can collect it yourself, but there's issues around how frank people will be, even when they're talking to an independent third party, let alone when they're speaking directly back to the company. In this same case of this forest in Tanzania, we tried an experiment where we surveyed in some villages. The company did the survey, and in other villages we did the survey. And by the way, that graph I showed you was only for the villages where we did the survey. And we actually, I mean, only for the data we collected as opposed to the company's data. We actually, sorry, I misstated. We surveyed in the same villages, but we did it independently, sometimes the company and sometimes us. Everything was exactly the same promise of confidentiality and so on. And across the board, there was a 23% positive bias in the answers that were given to the company surveyors as opposed to the Keystone surveyors. And this is highly validated throughout the survey world, where people are in a dependency relationship or a power dynamic is in the relationship, or there's some way where they're going to be trying to figure out how their answers can most advantage themselves. There's always going to be this bias. It's sometimes called a courtesy bias. But in order to, so we try to protect confidentiality in this way and anonymize. So that's why the reports appear in the way that they do, as evidenced by this this slide. Okay, this is a summary slide which emphasizes the points that I've been making throughout, which is it's not about collecting the data and even collecting the data well. You've got to do that. But it's about a cycle of activities that are embedded in your performance management system. Doing a survey every 18 months or 12 months and publishing a report is not going to yield anything like the benefits of doing a big survey every 18 months and then doing constant surveys of tiny 1, 2, 3, 4 questions along the way, and managing to the variations that you're seeing and reporting back to people what you're hearing. And so this this kind of slide looks at the details around each of the 7 steps in the operational cycle that we encourage people to follow. Maybe just a point about, I haven't said too much about triangulating with other data, but the illustration from Tanzania was a perfect example of where feedback data was then triangulated with data that was collected independently, if you will, objective data, in that case incidents of harm to the forest, and produced that interesting graph and some insights. And there's many, and organizations have lots of different kinds of data, and so it's very interesting to kind of compare and see if you can start to get some trends. In the case of this forestry project, we have a predictive indicator. We can tell in the wet season what may happen in the dry season when people light fires. And so the company has a chance, given the seasonality there, to kind of fix things and then take the temperature before they end up putting out fires. Okay, you might have been asking yourself, how the heck am I going to get benchmarks if I run a survey with my constituents, because I don't have any way of coordinating with other actors who are like me, who are surveying their constituents. We're asking different questions, so how can we get valid comparisons? Anyway, even if you're not asking yourself that question, that's a question we've been asking ourselves. And we're building a tool that we call the Feedback Commons. And we've got a kind of a miniature or a prototype version of it on our website now, which is a free app that you can use to run a survey. And if you use our app to run the survey, it's an online survey in this case, there's a bunch of questions, pull-down questions, which you can pull down and build a little survey, input a bunch of email addresses, send it out, and then wait a little while, and then go online again in a while and look at this, look at the feedback that you've got from your survey on the questions, alongside all of the other data in our database from other organizations' respondents' answers to the same questions. So if you will, the benchmarks is kind of built into it. And we're now building a kind of a souped-up version of that, which will be a kind of global resource for building surveys and running surveys and getting benchmarks. And so that's just what we're trying to do right now that's relevant to this benchmark challenge. The way this happens in the commercial world, in the customer satisfaction world, is basically companies build proprietary databases, and then they sell the benchmarks to the companies that they do surveys for. And we don't think that that's a fast enough way to scale up this methodology and get people to use it. So what we want to do is create the Feedback Commons, in a sense crowdsource the benchmarking process through a tool like this. And the business model for that will be a very low cost kind of, there'll be a kind of a freemium model where you can kind of get in there for free and build your surveys, but you don't get a lot of data back, you don't get a lot of benchmarks, but for very low amounts of money you can then start to get powerful benchmarks. So the real expense here is not the benchmarks, it's the surveys. So if you're going to spend, $5,000 to do a survey, you're going to spend $150 to get benchmarks. So that's the kind of scenario that we're looking at. Okay, this is my conclusion, which is that really to say what this is all about. I hope it's obvious, but let me state it this way. The point of Constituent Voice is actually not data, it's not even dialogue, it's to create a culture in your organization which makes the organization on the balls of its feet, that makes it really accountable to the experience of its constituents, so that staff are constantly innovating, reassessing, and improving on the basis of real-time feedback. Once you've got all that, then you also have a bonus, which is you get a bunch of great information that's coming in through your surveys that you can use to communicate your performance and your outcomes to your donors and investors and other stakeholders. Okay, I think I'll stop there and invite questions. We'll just see where people's appetite is and maybe what's not clear, all that. So thank you very much, and back to you, Tamsin.
Great, thanks, David. I see we do have a couple of questions. Just to remind everybody, in the right-hand menu there is a questions section where you can just post your questions. So one of the first questions here, David, is how long does it actually take to deliver the surveys and gather all the data from start to finish? And what kind of skill set does it require in that process?
It depends how big a survey you want to run, but to run one of these bigger surveys with, say, 40 questions, what we typically do is run a longer survey at the beginning, and then out of the longer survey identify 2 or 3 key questions which the organization then will run continually across the representative sample. But to do the start off, that's called the kickoff survey, you can have the whole thing done start to finish in 6 months. And what's involved is it doesn't really require a particular skill set. We recommend using an independent survey firm to collect the data the first time, because you can get, you establish confidentiality, you're more likely to get frank answers to the question. So when it comes to the actual survey, you can buy in that piece. But in terms of figuring out what questions you want to ask, we've developed templates that are free to download from our website that I think any manager could use to essentially design the survey. Maybe the fine-tuning on the questions and stuff, you could do that together with your survey specialist, data collector. But for the rest of it, there's templates around, including on our website, that you pretty much, I think, prep a porter.
So if you're seeing this as a 6-month process, presumably this is a form of impact performance evaluation that one wouldn't necessarily do annually. How often would you recommend it?
I think that you could do a big survey once every 18, 24 months, but then but the point is it's about a pulse. So, you want that constant pulse. You want to be taking the pulse constantly. So, really it's forever. I mean, it's feedback that you want to be getting all the time. And if you think about customer satisfaction industry, companies that are the best companies in the world at listening and responding to their customers, they never stop asking questions.
So, I mean, to that extent, to say that it's a 6-month process, actually, it's really an ongoing process, right, to keep you kind of attuned. So you could take smaller subset samples more regularly. Is that kind of your thought?
Exactly. And for certain kinds of analyses, you might do X analysis every 12 months or another analysis every 12 months, but the core kind of feedback loop lands in monthly management scorecards. Staff see how they're doing. You're making changes in real time. You're seeing if those changes are reflected in feedback. If you make a change that you think is going to improve things and your scores don't go up, you say, gee, what's going on here? You maybe convene a focus group. You sit down with some people in a room and you dig into it. I always say what this is it's a thermometer. It tells you what the temperature is. It doesn't tell you whether you've got a mild cold or the bubonic plague. So to find that out, you have to go in and do other things, and it's just commonsensical, really.
So a great question here from Helen is, how do you deal with survey fatigue, and what is the smallest sample size you found to be worthwhile?
So survey fatigue, I have an unusual answer to the question of survey fatigue, which is if answering a survey is a waste of your time, then you are fatigued even before you start. But if answering a survey is adding value for you because the company is responding and you get improvements in the service that you care about, then the fatigue is not an issue. And in fact, it's kind of fun. And that goes back to the credibility paradox. we see response rates go up when people find that the survey is worth their while. So in a way, survey fatigue is you shouldn't have it if you're doing this properly. And on the sample size question, you know that there's books and books written about sample sizes, but one of the weird things about sample sizes is you don't actually, often you don't need a very big sample to get an accurate picture of your constituency. But it is a technical answer because it depends on the heterogeneity of the community and so on. So there's no a simple answer to the question, except what I would say is that generally, if you're doing continuous surveying across your population, you're randomizing it across in some way, you can avoid asking the same people the question very often. It hits them, that you don't hit the same person too many times, and get a pretty accurate picture of what's going on across the whole population fairly straightforwardly.
So related to that, David, another question here is, once you've collected feedback, how do you aggregate individual voices to achieve a sort of a detailed report back? Is there a way to create a quantitative measure at all, or does this form a part of data alongside, for example, an SROI? You know, where does it fit in the whole quantum or the continuum of impact evaluation methodology?
Sure. First of all, the data that you would get from feedback sometimes directly relates to your outcomes, your results, your impact. I mean, sometimes the only way to know an impact is to ask people. And so in those circumstances, with those kinds of impacts, you're actually getting impact data, and it fits into whatever framework you have, whatever larger measurement framework you're using. You need an overall framework that has these different kinds of data that you're collecting that I talked about: performance data, results data, and relationship data. And sometimes your relationship data is also in the other two buckets because it directly speaks to them. So you need, I guess the first point is you need an overall measurement framework. And by the way, we've developed some tools that lay those out. We have an impact planning, assessment, and learning framework tool, and we've got a theory of change building tool that are all free to use on our website that shows you how we think about those things. But I'm seeing a lot of consensus now out there around these kinds of frameworks. I think they're getting to be pretty generic. And I think what's different about what I'm saying here is that that there's two things about feedback data of this kind that are really important, that are slightly different from the typical approach in impact frameworks. The one is that this data is predictive when you get it right. That you're not waiting to know your impact. You can here now know what impact you're going to have in 6 months' time. And then you're still going to have to measure it in 6 months' time because you have to prove that that the prediction was accurate. But we're now seeing again and again circumstances like the case in Tanzania, where the community perceptions show up later in arson. In that case, it was historical, but we're tracking it now, and we're expecting to see it going forward. But I have there's some really interesting data from classrooms where students' responses to questions in the beginning of the school year correlated to their scores on the standardized tests at the end of the school year. And so you have these predictive indicators which are incredibly useful. And then the second thing is that they're really valuable for real-time improvements. Well, it relates to the predictive thing. I mean, if you're going to be able to predict something, then it doesn't look like the prediction you want, get in there and fix it. So,
yeah. Can I ask you another question, which actually is a personal question? We had a meeting at a pension fund earlier this week, and one of the comments they said was they don't know how to survey their members in terms of the interest they might have in investing in impact investment. Is this a methodology that could apply in that context?
Yes, I think that the things we've been learning about, so so yes, but it's really more about a tool to improve the relationship between, in this case, the pension fund and its members. So by creating smart feedback loops that are asking questions that interest people, that collects the answers and gives them back to the group in ways that makes everybody kind of raise their head and say, oh, that's interesting, I didn't see that, and that's helpful. It just creates a context where you can then unearth things like new services or new areas of opportunities like impact investing, and you can help connect the dots for people between what's happening now and what might happen in the future. So it's more about, if you will, the relationship than it is about the particular thing about finding out what it is they might want. They may not know they want it, or they may not know what the full possibility is. So it's in the dialogic piece to this. So you use the survey to create the feedback loop, and then you close the loop.
And is there an accreditation model that you envisage in terms of training intermediaries so that they can actually deliver or be skilled in both the delivery and the implementation of this? Do you see a necessity for that?
Yes, that's I do. I mean, I think we're in the early stages of all this, and I think that the Feedback Commons platform that we're trying to build will become a way to do that accreditation. We were thinking of having a kind of a marketplace alongside the data commons, and the marketplace would be a place where people who are in organizations that are offering survey, data collection, and analysis services could advertise their wares, as it were. But what we wanted to do was create a feedback loop about the performance of those survey firms in the marketplace, kind of like eBay, seller buyer feedback about sellers on eBay, where in effect you have a crowd-based certification model. So that if I want to sell, if Keystone wants to sell its services on the Feedback Commons, then anybody who might hire Keystone can see what our last 25, 50, 100 clients have said about our services. And frankly, I think that's a better way to get at this certification quality assurance issue than trying to establish some independent organization, accreditation body that, at the end of the day, is who's going to accredit them.
Who guards the gods?
Yes.
So I don't know if there are any other questions from anybody. David, it's been great to have this insight and to learn more about this tool, and I'm very excited to see how it can work in some of the contexts that we are finding people looking at feedback on impact performance, certainly within this framework. So really on behalf of us, thank you for doing the session and for answering this with everybody. David's post will be up online by the end of the week. And if you do have any questions that come to you after the session, please feel free to send them to us or to David.
Tamsin?
Yeah.
Could I'd like to make one final kind of closing comment, if people will tolerate it.
Sure.
And it is this, that it's one of the questions that I'm often asked, and I didn't preempt it this time, but I often do. I wanted to see if it came up. Is and maybe it's because I didn't emphasize so much that a lot of our methodology is adapted from the customer satisfaction industry, and a lot of times what I hear is people saying, "Gee, the people we're serving, the clients we have, it's really very different from the kinds of choices that people are making, buying decisions that people are making in the kind of affluent consumer market, and therefore really how relevant is this tool in this context. And the point I want to make about that is that it's very relevant, and it's relevant in that we ask different questions, but the underlying point is that whether you're choosing which watch or which cell phone to buy, you're making some decisions, you're making some choices. But if you're a smallholder farmer and you're making choices about how you spend your time and energy and whether you adopt this cropping technique or whether you buy that hybrid seed, you're making trade-offs, you're making decisions about how to engage with an organization. They're different choices, but they're choices. And what this methodology does is it helps you figure out, based on your understanding of the choices that people are making around how they work with you, we figure out the right questions to ask, and then you can take that pulse continuously and improve it. And so that's the key. So even though the context is very different, the underlying dynamics are the same, and that's why the methodology works.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone for attending this evening.
Okay, thank you all for listening.
Thanks, David. I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.